Marie-Jo, tu nous entends?
Ah oui, ouais, c'est bon alors.
Super.
Yes. Et pour toi?
Ça va, super.
On va commencer. Sangye chön tan soge chonan la jan chön paranto dane Khelzang Puntso Tangye Chinso Gimpe Sonam Gen Jola Penchel Sangye Drum Parasho Sangye Chutan Soge Chonam La Janchum Paranto Dane Khelzang Puntso Tangye Chinso Gimpe Sonam Gen Jola Penchel Sangye Drum Parasho Sangye Chutan Soge Chonam La Chanchu Paranto Dane Chamso Chien Tangye Chinso Gimpe Sonam Gen Jola Penchil Sangye Drum Parasho Semchen Tamche Dewa Tang Dewe Gyutan Tempara Gyurchen Tongara Ki Gyutan Chawa Gyurchen Dungara Mepe Dewa Dampa Tang Menjewa Gyurchen Nyere Chantang Tang Jawe Tang Nyam Chimpo La Nepa Gyurchen Chiam Penden Tsawe Lama Jigmé Rinpoché Tangye Chewa Pime Tinsho Lan Kanjen Sunte Kusum Toki Angon Sarato Sara Chum Den Jam Yon La Cha Tsa Lo Kange Lo Ja Chenye Chinja Nye Ta Nanta Sha Sewe Chenye Tengke Si Jie Si Chire Ni Jie To Kala Le Pamse Kanda Si Pe Chunrara Mare Mundo To Nge Che Chewe Chotso Gen La Po Chie Trase Yen La To Ju Yon Ten Son Chota Cha Cho Nye Mo Nye Long Le Ke Cha Cho Che Che Jim Mare Mun Sare Dongare Nyugu Jinye Chöze Chate Nam Dene Tajin Sachu Tarasan Yanten Lenzo Gese Tawa Kwa Chocha Choton Chonye Kinche Dale Mun Sare Jambe Yang La De Tsede Cheki Chenra Asare Ke La Temo Mun Para Sene Canton Tenche Xion La Tapai La De Pape Nawa Tsarato So
Hello, everyone. We're continuing with the detailed explanations of non-associated conditioning phenomena. We saw obtaining and non-obtaining. We saw shared part, the state without distinction, and we're currently looking at the two types of even engagement. First, we looked at the essence of each of them. Then we looked at the essence of even engagement without distinction. And now we're looking at the essence of even engagement of cessation in and of itself. Yesterday we began this part. This presentation of the sixth non-associated conditioning phenomenon, the even engagement of cessation. And we began the presentation by way of 7 points, as was previously done for even engagement without distinction. We covered the first point, its definition, with the second line of stanza 43, which reads, even engagement of cessation also is also similar. Second line. Then we looked at the intention with which practitioners engage in this even engagement of cessation. The stanza reads, its goal is to abide in peace. Then we looked at the third point, the support of mind. It is born of the peak of existence. We looked at its essence. The even engagement of cessation is virtuous. And we looked at the result, the fruit. Its result is to be experienced in 2 ways, or is uncertain. We concluded partway through stanza 44, line 1. We'll continue with the 6th point out of these 7 points. The 6th point is beings who cultivate this meditative absorption. Who are the people who cultivate even engagement of cessation? Solely noble beings. And in particular, among them, those who have attained the fruit of non-returner, and those who have attained the state of arhathood. Which people cultivate even engagement of cessation? These 2, noble beings who have attained the fruit of non-returner, and noble beings who have attained the state of arhathood. As a reminder, we saw an introduction to the 4 fruits of noble beings in the presentation of the faculties at the beginning of this chapter. That is the 6th point. Now the 7th point of this presentation. We'll ask ourselves how even engagement of cessation is obtained. Do these noble beings who obtain even engagement of cessation do so solely having freed themselves of 2 things? These 2 things being afflictive obscurations relative to the 3 realms of samsara. That's the first thing. And the second thing is obstructions relative to meditative absorptions and that prevent one from accomplishing miracles. So if we go over the question again, the question is, do these noble beings obtain even engagement of cessation solely having freed themselves from all afflictive obscurations relative to the 3 realms of samsara, as well as obstructions relative to meditative absorption and which prevent from accomplishing miracles? The answer is no, that is insufficient. Effort is still necessary to attain even engagement of cessation. This is why it is stated in the next part of line 1 of stanza 44. It is obtained by noble beings by way of application. Application here means effort. Even engagement of cessation is obtained by way of effort. This concludes the presentation in 7 points of even engagement of cessation. In conclusion, Khelzang Puntso tells us that if we know these different points well each time concerning these 3 non-associated conditioning phenomena, the ones we've just covered, the state without distinction, even engagement without distinction, and even engagement of cessation, then we will truly be able to distinguish which corresponds to what, and will be clear on what these 3 non-associated conditioning phenomena are. Now we'll look at an additional point, the particular case of its obtaining. In stanza 44, line 1, it is said that this even engagement of cessation is obtained by noble beings by way of application. In other words, through effort. The question that we'll ask ourselves here is, what about the Buddha? Line 2 says, that of the Muni is obtained by his enlightenment. For the Buddha, obtaining even engagement of cessation does not occur based on effort. Due to having attained the path of no more learning, actualizing this even engagement occurs without effort. Why doesn't the Buddha need to make effort to actualize even engagement of cessation? Buddha does not need to make effort for any of the actions that he carries out. Due to having gathered the accumulations and purifying obscurations for 3 immeasurable kalpas, he no longer needs to make effort. In particular, here, in the context of obtaining even engagement of cessation, this occurs without effort. Here it's said in the text that even engagement of cessation, the Buddha's even engagement of cessation, was obtained due to his enlightenment. For the Buddha, even engagement of cessation is obtained through enlightenment. And here, when we talk about enlightenment, what does this refer to? It refers to 2 types of knowledge. The first, knowledge that all that is to be abandoned has indeed been abandoned. And second type of knowledge that these things will not reappear later. When we have these 2 types of knowledge come to our mind, then we can actualize even engagement of cessation without effort. The Buddha can actualize even engagement of cessation when he wishes to do so. That concludes the particular case of obtaining even engagement of cessation. Now there's a third part, which is more supplementary explanations. These additional explanations refer to stanza 44, lines 3 and 4. The root text says, not first, because of being obtained with 34 instants. So now we'll look at what's behind this sentence in the root text. Here, what happens is a debate. There is a debate between the Kashmirian Vaibhashika and a group of contradictors. The Kashmirian Vaibhashika, who are among the various subclasses of Vaibhashika, they think that he obtained even engagement of cessation at the moment when the path of no more learning is born, the fifth path. This is what the Kashmirian Vaibhashika think, that even engagement of cessation was obtained by the Buddha the moment that he gave rise to the path of no more learning. The others don't agree. They say that the Buddha had already obtained this even engagement of cessation. He obtained it at the moment when he actualized the path of seeing. For the Kashmirian Vaibhashika, the Buddha obtained this non-associated conditioning phenomenon this even engagement upon reaching the fifth path, the path of no more learning, whereas the others hold that he did so when he actualized the path of seeing. So first we'll go into the point of view of the Vaibhashika. The Kashmirian Vaibhashika reply that the Buddha did not obtain this even engagement of cessation beforehand at the moment of the path of seeing. For them, the Buddha obtained this even engagement of cessation. He did not obtain it prior to the last path, the path of no more learning. In order to explain this, the Kashmirian Vaibhashika explain how the Buddha is capable of obtaining even engagement of cessation following 34 moments. This is what we'll look at now. This concerns the additional explanations of the 34 moments. In order to give this explanation, the Vaibhashika of Kashmir explain these 34 instances. They explain these instances beginning with the Buddha's enlightenment, the moment when he was not yet a Buddha, when he was still an ordinary being at the beginning of his life. Before beginning the Buddha followed two masters, two teachers of his time. He followed their teachings. Teachers who were alive at that time. Through following the teachings of these two masters, he managed to accomplish a worldly path. By accomplishing this worldly path, he was able to abandon all the nuances of things to abandon, all the way up through the sphere of nothingness, which is the third level of the formless realm. Thus, due to the teachings of these two masters, and due to the worldly path he followed, he was able to abandon all the nuances of things to abandon, right up through the sphere of nothingness. And through this worldly path, he was able to actualize the meditative absorption of the peak of existence, in other words, the fourth level of the form realm. That's what he actualized thanks to the teachings from these two masters. Once again, we're talking about the Buddha before he attained enlightenment, when he was still an ordinary being, during his lifetime in which he became the Buddha. He was a prince named Siddhartha Gautama. He left his palace. Let's not get off topic. That's the story of the Buddha, though. So he left his father's palace. He studied and practiced with two masters, two teachers. And thanks to these teachings and his practice, he abandoned the nuances of things to abandon all the way up through the sphere of nothingness. He attained the meditative absorption of the peak of existence. He reached the highest level of the formless realm. That was the meditation. And then he went to sit beneath the tree of enlightenment, and the path of seeing arose in his mind. The path of seeing arose in his mind. He went through the first 15 moments of the path of seeing, which includes 16 moments. He then actualized the 16th moment, which is in relation to the path of meditation, which comes just after the path of seeing. That's what he did beneath the tree of enlightenment. So this is a bit of review of what we saw last year. So then we might wonder, what fruit did he attain upon accomplishing the path of seeing and entering the path of meditation? He attained the fruit of non-returner, bounding non-returner, because due to this worldly path, he abandoned everything that was to be abandoned ahead of time. So when he reached the 16th moment, he didn't need to go through all of those abandonments. He had already abandoned all of those nuances on a worldly path. Thus, when he reached the path of meditation, after 16 moments, he obtained the fruit of non-returner. Because through a worldly path, he had already abandoned everything that is to be abandoned, all the way up through the sphere of nothingness, the third level of the formless realm. This means that at this point, the nuances to be abandoned in relation to the peak of existence still remained. Concerning the peak of existence, there are 9 nuances of things to abandon. As we saw earlier, the things that are strong, 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 medium, strong, weak, weak, strong, weak, medium, weak, weak, etc., etc. That makes 9. So these 9 nuances in relation to the peak of existence remained at this point. If we look at things with a general overview, there are 9 abandons at this point. abandonments. And if we look more in detail, within each of these abandonments, there are 2 moments. This might be the first time we're talking about this. The first moment is called Irresistible Path. It's a path that will, with certainty and without obstacles, yield the result of abandonment. That's the first moment. The second moment is called a liberated path. It is the result of the abandonment itself. For each of these 9 abandonments that remained on the peak of existence, there's a moment just before, the moment that will irresistibly yield abandonment, and the moment of abandonment itself, liberated path. And this occurs for all 9 abandonments. So 9 abandonments times 2 moments yields 18 moments. So 18 more moments. We looked at the 16 moments of the path of seeing, the 16th being the path of meditation, and then we come to these 18 additional moments of abandonments related to the peak of existence. Among these 18 moments, up to the 17th moment, in other words, up to the irresistible path of the 9th nuance of things to abandon in relation to the peak of existence, all of the abandonment of things to abandon in relation to the peak of existence occurs over the course of 18 moments, and at the 17th moment, not everything is abandoned yet. It's certain that it will be abandoned, but the last abandonment remains. At this, concerning these 17 first moments among the 18, these comprise the path of meditation. This 17th moment, the irresistible path of the final nuance in relation to the peak of existence, this irresistible path corresponds to what we call meditative absorption, Vajra-like meditative absorption. Then comes the completely liberated path, which is the result of this meditative absorption. This is no longer the path of meditation. It is the path of no more learning. So that concerns the 34 moments. For the Vaibhashika, starting from this 18th moment, the Buddha attains the capacity of entering into even engagement of cessation. The explanation continues with the fact that the Buddha obtains the capacity to enter even engagement of cessation at this point, but he won't use it. If he enters this even engagement of cessation, he can no longer help beings. Thus, he obtained even engagement of cessation, but he did not actualize it in and of itself. He did not manifest it. This even engagement of cessation is obtained over the course of 34 moments, according to the Kashmirian Vaibhashika. 16 moments of the paths of seeing and meditation, plus the 18 moments corresponding to 9 nuances of things to abandon in relation to the peak of existence. The Kashmirian Vaibhashika say that even engagement of cessation is obtained through 34 moments because they are basing their idea on the story of the Buddha's life. The fact that he followed two masters, that he practiced a worldly path, that he abandoned all that is to be abandoned up through the sphere of nothingness, that he attained the meditative absorption in relation to the peak of existence, and that he wasn't satisfied, and thus he went to Bodh Gaya and sat beneath the Bodhi tree and made the promise not to come out of meditation until he attained enlightenment. And thus he actualized the super-worldly paths, the paths beyond the world, the paths of seeing and meditation. Based on this super-worldly path, he was able to eliminate the final nuances relative to the peak of existence that were necessary to abandon. All of this occurred by way of these 34 moments, and at the end he obtained the capacity to enter into even engagement of cessation. For the Kashmirian Vaibhashika, the fact that the Buddha made the promise not to come out of meditation until attaining enlightenment is why he could not actualize even engagement of cessation prior to that on the path of seeing. Because he made the promise not to come out of meditation until he attained enlightenment. That's the view of the Kashmirian Vaibhashika. There are, however, contradictors. According to those who contradict the Vaibhashika, they will say that once the Buddha actualized the path of seeing, he came out of meditation. In other words, first he accomplished the path of seeing and then he came out of meditation. What the contradicting party says is not an agreement. The Kashmirian Vaibhashika do not accept it. They say that the Buddha promised not to come out of meditation until attaining enlightenment. Thus, he could not have actualized even engagement of cessation in between. According to the Kashmirian Vaibhashika, between the start of the night, when he began meditating, and early morning, when he reached enlightenment, the Buddha did not come out of meditation. That's what the Vaibhashika say. But the contradicting party says that when the Buddha attained the path of seeing, he came out of meditation and entered even engagement of cessation. And then later, the Buddha came back to his meditation and concluded by attaining enlightenment. For them, the Buddha actualized even engagement of cessation before attaining enlightenment. The Vaibhashika reply, of course, that the Buddha made a promise not to come out of meditation. How could the Buddha neglect his promise? This concludes the explanations on the mode of obtaining even engagement of cessation for a Buddha. Now we'll take a short break, and after we'll continue with another point. Now we'll look at an additional point concerning the support of the body. In the outline, it is titled Shared Presentation of Their Support. Yes, it's the shared presentation of the support of the two even engagements. We find this in the stanza 45, lines 1 and 2. The root text here says, "These two even engagements can be produced by those endowed with the support of the desire or form realm. But the first time that even engagement of cessation is actualized, it is among humans." These two even engagements can be produced by those endowed with the support of the desire or form realm, but the first time that even engagement of cessation is actualized, it is among humans. Earlier, we saw that in order to actualize even engagement without distinction, one needs a support of mind, mental support of the fourth meditative absorption of the form realm. We also saw that in order to actualize even engagement of cessation, the one we just went over, one needs a mental support of the peak of existence. This is in terms of the support of mind. What type of mind is necessary in order to obtain each of these two even engagements? Now the question that we'll ask ourselves is, what about the support of body? We talked about the mental support, but what about the support of body? This is what the stanza explains here. The stanza says, with a body of the desire realm or of the form realm, we are capable of actualizing even engagement without distinction and that of cessation. The stanza also says that if we want to actualize even engagement of cessation for the first time, we need the support of a human body. That concerns the first time that we will accomplish even engagement of cessation. It happens among humans. Concerning even engagement without distinction, there are no precise rules. Concerning even engagement without distinction, the first even engagement, the one we covered prior to even engagement of cessation, there are no precise rules. This even engagement can be actualized for the first time with a body of the desire realm or a body of the form realm. This even engagement without distinction has been obtained many times in the past, in past lives. And thus, there are no precise rules. In other words, we can obtain this even engagement without distinction in the desire realm or in the form realm. Whereas, for the first time we actualize even engagement of cessation, this can only occur with a human support. So now we've covered the two even engagements. So now we can continue with the seventh non-associated conditioning phenomenon, which is life force faculty. We find this in stanza 45, lines 3 and 4. 2, 3, 4. 3 and 4. Life force faculty is vitality, meaning the support of heat and the consciousnesses. Let's look at the definition. The definition of life force faculty is life. Tse in Tibetan, which can be translated by longevity or vitality as well. The definition of life force faculty is life. Tse in Tibetan, which is also translated as longevity or vitality. Now we can look at the function of life force faculty. The function of life force faculty is to be a support that maintains two things: heat in the body and the consciousnesses. The function of life force faculty is to be a support that maintains heat in the body and the consciousnesses. Then Khelzang Puntso asks us, what is meant by life here? And so people in the room answered, time, like time between birth and death. And Khelzang Puntso replied, if you like your life, don't waste your time. Life is none other than time. So don't waste your time. This life force faculty is a non-associated conditioning phenomenon. This concludes the presentation of the seventh non-associated conditioning phenomenon, life force faculty. Let's continue with the characteristics. Now we'll study a group of 4 non-associated conditioning phenomena. This group corresponds to the 4 characteristics of conditioned phenomena. This concerns birth, maintaining, aging, and impermanence. The 4 characteristics of conditioned phenomena. This is connected to stanza 46, lines 1 and 2. The characteristics of conditioned phenomena are birth, aging, maintaining, and impermanence. Once again, in the Tibetan stanza, we find a subtlety. At the end of line 2, there is a ni, which means that conditioned phenomena have no more than these 4 characteristics. It means that there are precisely 4 characteristics. To carry out this study of the 4 characteristics, we will consider an example, that of a vase. Let's consider the first characteristic, birth. In this case, the birth of the vase. This non-associated conditioning phenomenon, which is birth, has a function. The function is to bring about the birth of a conditioned phenomenon. Birth has a function, to bring about the birth of a conditioned phenomenon. In this case, to bring about the birth of the vase. The second characteristic is maintaining. Once the vase has been born, the vase's continuum maintains itself. What causes the vase's continuum to be maintained? This is the characteristic of maintaining. The function of the characteristics of maintaining is to maintain the continuum of the conditioned phenomenon. Let's continue with the third characteristic, the characteristic of aging. This concerns the fact that things come apart, decline. What causes a continuum to age, to disintegrate? The characteristic of aging. The function of this characteristic, the function of the characteristic of aging, is to cause the continuum of a conditioned phenomenon to decline. The fourth characteristic is that of impermanence. The characteristic of impermanence is what makes a conditioned phenomenon cease in each moment. It is what makes a conditioned phenomenon cease in every moment. And every moment, the characteristic of impermanence brings about the cessation of the conditioned phenomenon. Now we come to a tricky point. Stanza 46, line 3. they have the birth of birth, etc. Here there are some discussions between the Vaibhashika and the Sautrantika. The Sautrantika say that the birth of the vase is nothing other than the vase. The birth of the vase is nothing other than the vase. That's the Sautrantika point of view. The Vaibhashika say that the birth of the vase is not the vase. Why? Because the vase cannot be born from itself. The vase cannot be born from itself. We'll give another example to illustrate this. The example of the sharpest knife that exists. The sharpest knife that exists can never cut itself. In the same way, whatever conditioned phenomenon is at hand, the conditioned phenomenon cannot be born from itself. If we accept that the birth of the vase is the vase, then the vase must be able to be born from itself. Then the Sautrantika say that if this is so, then the birth of the vase itself is a wholly other conditioned phenomenon. The birth of the vase itself is a wholly other conditioned phenomenon. If the birth of the vase is conditioned, then there must also be birth of the vase. Let's now consider the example of a pillar. For the Vaibhashika, the factor birth of the pillar brought about the birth of the pillar. The pillar itself is a conditioned phenomenon. It needs something to bring about its birth. Thus, according to the Vaibhashika, this is the characteristic of the birth of the pillar. If the pillar and the birth of the pillar are different, this means that the birth of the pillar is itself conditioned. If the birth of the pillar is conditioned, it also needs something that brings about its birth. Thus, there must be another factor, the factor birth of the pillar. Thus, the Sautrantika say, if you, the Vaibhashika, accept such a system, then it follows that there will be births of births of births, and so on, up through infinity. In a second, there would be innumerable births. This is what the Sautrantika reproach of the Vaibhashika, this particular point. The Vaibhashika reply that they have no problem with this. They have an answer. The Vaibhashika accept that there is necessarily the birth of the pillar. However, after that, the births do not continue infinitely. We stay with 2 births. There is the pillar, and the birth of the pillar, and the birth of the pillar, but it doesn't go further. But why? If I come back to stanza 46, line 3, it reads, they have birth of birth, etc. This stanza indicates that the Vaibhashika accept 2 births. The following line says, and apply to 8 phenomena or to 1. This line is the answer to why the births are not infinite. This explains why the Vaibhashika do not accept this system of infinite births. So we'll look at the Vaibhashika's reply, which explains why there are not infinite births. We find this again in stanza 46, line 4, and apply to 8 phenomena or to 1. In order to explain this, we'll come back to the example of the vase. We'll particularly concentrate on the characteristic birth of the vase. This characteristic, birth of the vase, so we may wonder, concerning this characteristic, birth of the vase, how many characteristics of birth will it produce? How many phenomena will it produce? It will produce 8 phenomena, 8 dharmas. The phenomenon, birth of the vase, produces 8 phenomena. We'll look at what these 8 phenomena are. The birth of the vase will give rise to the birth of the vase, but also the maintaining of the vase, the aging of the vase, and the impermanence of the vase. That's 4. As we saw, in the Vaibhashika tradition, a birth cannot bring about its own birth. Thus, birth of the vase brings about the birth of the vase itself, maintaining of the vase, aging of the vase, and impermanence of the vase. The birth of the vase will also produce other things. It will also produce the birth of the vase, the maintaining of the birth of the vase, the aging of the birth of the vase, and the impermanence of the birth of the vase. All 8 of these phenomena are produced by the birth of the vase. Through this explanation, we can see that birth produces 8 things. That's what the root text stated. They apply to 8 phenomena. All 8 of these phenomena are produced by birth. Birth produces 8 things. Birth produces birth of birth. The birth of birth. Okay, so among other things, birth produces the birth of birth, But we might also wonder, what produces birth itself? We looked at what birth produces, 8 phenomena, but what produces birth? The answer that the Vaibhashika give is that birth of birth produces birth. Each produces the other. And this is why birth of birth and this is why the Vaibhashika say that there are not infinite births. In one moment, birth causes the appearance of 8 things. However, the birth of birth causes the appearance of a single thing, birth. Each produces the other. This is why the root text says that the primary and secondary characteristics apply to 8 or 1 thing. Birth applies to 8 things, and birth of birth applies to 1 thing. That's the response from the Vaibhashika. So now we may wonder how this works for the other characteristics among the 4 besides birth. We can consider maintaining, the vases maintaining. The answer is that it works just like birth of the vase. Same logic. We'll conclude with another point that the Sautrantika bring up, and then we'll have some time for questions. The Sautrantika bring up another point. If you say, you being the Vaibhashika, if you say that all phenomena of the past, present, and future have the characteristic of birth, then why do they not appear now? The phenomena of past, present, and future. Past and future phenomena are also conditioned. Thus, they also have the characteristic of birth. So why don't they appear now, just like the phenomena of the present? The Vaibhashika reply in stanza 47, lines 1 and 2. They say, the root text says, without the coming together of causes and conditions, birth does not produce what is to be produced. Indeed, for the Vaibhashika, all phenomena, all conditioned phenomena of past, present, and future have the characteristic of birth. However, this doesn't mean that they will all be born right now. Phenomena are born if the causes and conditions come together, if the causes and conditions are gathered for them to appear. If the causes and conditions do not come together, then they are not born. we can look at the example of a seed, a rice seed, for example. If we put it in a completely closed up location, it won't grow. But an entirely enclosed location, it won't grow. But if we throw it out into a field, it'll grow. Why doesn't the rice seed grow in an enclosed location? Because the causes and conditions are not there. Why does a seed of rice grow in a fertile field? Because the causes and conditions come together, are gathered. This concludes the explanation of the 4 characteristics of conditioned phenomena, which are the next 4 non-associated conditioning phenomena in the list. We had looked at 7, and then we just did 4, so now we've covered 11. Now there's time for questions. I have a question about the 4 characteristics. If we consider, okay, there's birth in one moment. Can you hear me now? Birth, one moment, maintaining, one moment, aging, one moment. But here it says that impermanence brings about the cessation of an object in every moment. So what's the time-space organization of maintaining and aging between birth and impermanence if impermanence is every moment? I'll answer. Concerning the characteristics, in the explanation that was given here, the information that birth is a moment, maintaining is a moment, aging is a moment, that wasn't given. We didn't talk about various successive moments. We didn't get into a logic of a moment after moment. What is explained is that all conditioned phenomena possess these 4 characteristics. And here we are studying the non-associated conditioning phenomena. Among the 14 non-associated conditioning phenomena, we find these 4 characteristics of conditioned phenomena. Regardless of what conditioned phenomena is at hand, it will possess these 4 characteristics. But there's no explanation of the moments for each characteristic. Okay, that doesn't answer my question, but it did say that the characteristic of impermanence brings about the cessation of a conditioned phenomenon in every moment. I mean, it's a silly question maybe, but I'm just wondering. I mean, I hear what you're saying, but that doesn't answer my question. It's said that in every moment, subtle impermanence means that there is cessation. Where are aging and maintaining? Let me say this another way. A conditioned phenomenon possesses these 4 characteristics. We can agree on that. One of the characteristics is that it ceases in every moment and is born in every moment. In every moment, so long as this conditioned phenomenon is present, it possesses these 4 characteristics. In every moment of a conditioned phenomenon, these 4 characteristics are associated with it. Hello, thank you for the repetition. Brilliant as always. I have just a detail to ask about concerning the Tibetan in stanza 46. Marie mentioned a ni in the second line, the last line. Sorry, root text. 46. Okay, there it is. Once again, let me just clarify. I don't know how to read Tibetan, so I'm just repeating what was written in the transcript. What is said is that in stanza 46, at the end of line 2, there is a ni. Oh no, it doesn't. No, but it doesn't mean no. I thought, so far as I know, ni means 2 and shi means 4. No, about. Is there a translator here? If you run into a translator, why don't you reach out to them? I'd like to come back to the debate between the Vaibhashika and the Sautrantika. Okay, so I get that we don't necessarily have to fully agree with the Vaibhashika view. As it is, the Sautrantika don't agree with them. That's reassuring. But I'd like to understand a little bit better their vision, their way of considering the refutation of infinite births. The explanation that was given when you said that birth can be caused by another conditioned phenomenon, which is birth of birth. That seems logical. That's the point brought up by the Sautrantika. But just before, it was said that birth also causes birth of maintaining, birth of aging, birth of cessation, birth of impermanence, etc. I was wondering about that. It didn't seem logical. The answer that they give for why births are not infinite is to consider things in one direction, but also in the other direction. They look at birth and they say, what does birth produce? It produces the phenomenon, and it produces the other characteristics of the phenomenon. That's the first 4. But because birth itself is also a conditioned phenomenon, it will also produce its own 4 characteristics. Because according to the Vaibhashika, no phenomenon can appear from itself, and as birth is a conditioned phenomenon, if birth is a conditioned phenomenon, it also has birth, maintaining, aging, and impermanence. Thus, it produces these 4 characteristics. So that's why it said that birth produces the birth of birth. That's the explanation they give, among other things, because it produces 8 things in total. But then if we ask the question, what about birth? What produces it? Birth of birth produces birth. Each produces the other. That makes it a loop. And so there's no infinite birth. That's just the logic and why they say that it doesn't go any further. Okay, that's clear. Thank you. That speaks to me too. If birth produces itself, then it's not a conditioned phenomenon. According to the Vaibhashika, a conditioned phenomenon cannot produce itself. That is part of their point of view. And further to this, knowledge cannot know itself. We might see that in other schools of Buddhism, schools of thought, knowledge can know itself. Whereas here, this is not the case. As a phenomenon cannot produce itself, it necessarily has these 4 characteristics. We'll conclude here. Let's dedicate.
Si ben sole towa trawa la shom.